If you're so smart, then pay your own expenses. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I was still standing in the doorway of our cramped apartment on Maple Street in Cleveland, my backpack sliding off one shoulder, grease stains all over my Denny's uniform, my feet throbbing from pulling a double shift that had stretched from breakfast rush to closing time. My mother stood 3 feet away, her arms crossed tight across her chest, a stack of overdue bills clutched in her trembling hand like she was holding evidence at a murder trial. I didn't even know what I'd done to trigger this explosion. Maybe it was the quiet sigh that escaped my lips when she shoved those envelopes against my chest. Maybe it was the half-second hesitation before my fingers closed around them. Maybe it was just Tuesday, and Tuesday was as good a day as any for her anger to boil over. You think you're better than me now? Her voice cracked with fury. You think going to community college makes you some kind of genius? Then prove it. Pay your own damn expenses. Something inside me went completely, utterly still. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't launch into the defensive speech I'd rehearsed 1,000 times in my head during those late-night drives home from work. I just stood there for 3 long heartbeats, then nodded once and walked past her toward my bedroom. My name is Rebecca Collins, and I was 21 years old that night. For as long as I could remember, money had ruled our household like a cruel dictator, invisible but always present, always demanding, always taking more than it gave. 10 minutes. That's all it took me to pack up the life I'd been clinging to. 1 backpack. My laptop that I'd saved 6 months to buy. A few changes of clothes rolled tight. My worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird that Mrs. Henderson had given me in high school. And the one framed photo I owned of my father, taken at a 4th of July barbecue before he walked out on us when I was 9 and never looked back. She followed me down the narrow hallway, still shouting, her voice bouncing off the stained walls. Where the hell do you think you're going, Rebecca? I stopped at the front door, my hand on the knob, and turned to look at her one last time. She looked smaller somehow. Older. The woman who used to braid my hair before school had disappeared years ago, replaced by this bitter stranger I barely recognized. You told me to pay my own expenses, I said quietly, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I walked out into the October night and didn't look back, even when I heard her screaming my name from the doorway. Even when I heard something shatter against the wall inside. Even when every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around, apologize, and make myself small again. I kept walking. My father didn't just leave my mother when he walked out. He left responsibility behind like it was a coat he didn't need anymore. What followed wasn't just financial hardship. It was a slow, painful transformation of the woman who used to sing while making pancakes on Saturday mornings. She turned bitter, resentful, dependent in ways I didn't understand when I was younger but recognize clearly now. Every single problem became my fault. When I got my first job at 16, hostess at a Red Lobster near the highway, she insisted on helping me manage my money. She set up a joint checking account just to make things easier. When bills piled up, my paychecks disappeared faster than snow in July. I'd work 25 hours a week, and by the time I got my statement, there'd be $40 left. Rent doesn't pay itself, she'd say when I asked about it. The electric company doesn't care that you're in high school. By the time I started at Cuyahoga Community College, my scholarships and student loans were treated like they belonged to both of us. She stopped looking for steady work altogether, claiming her back hurt too much, her anxiety was too bad, her depression made it impossible. We're a team, Becca, she used to say, using the nickname only she called me. It's us against the world. What she really meant was, I work, I pay, and she spends. If I hesitated to hand over money, she'd bring up my father. You're just like him, she'd spit. Selfish. Only thinking about yourself. If I pushed back even a little, she'd cry and accuse me of abandoning her, of wanting her to end up homeless, of being an ungrateful daughter after everything she'd sacrificed. So I stayed. I worked double shifts at Denny's while taking 4 classes a semester. I handed over everything I earned. And I told myself this was just what being a good daughter looked like, what loyalty meant, what family meant. Until the night she told me to pay my own expenses. Until the night I realized that love shouldn't feel like drowning. I showed up at my friend Autumn's apartment in Lakewood around 10 that night, my backpack feeling like it weighed 100 pounds even though it held almost nothing. She opened the door in her pajamas, took one look at my face, and stepped aside without a word. "Couch is yours," she said simply, and handed me a blanket that smelled like lavender detergent. Autumn had been my lab partner in Biology 101, and we'd bonded over terrible coffee in the student center and shared frustration with professors who thought community college students didn't deserve their best effort. She'd heard enough of my stories to never say, "I told you so." She just let me sit there in her living room, staring at the muted TV, replaying the argument in my head until the words stopped making sense. Around midnight, she sat down next to me with 2 mugs of chamomile tea. "She still has your name on everything, doesn't she?" Autumn asked gently, her dark eyes full of concern. "The lease. The utilities. All of it." The words hit me like ice water. I'd been so focused on getting out, on surviving the moment, that I hadn't thought about the aftermath. My name was on the lease for the apartment. My name was on the electric bill, the gas bill, the internet service. My name was the primary account holder on the phone plan. If she stopped paying, or couldn't pay, they wouldn't go after her first. They'd come after me. They'd destroy my credit before I even had a chance to build it. "Oh God," I whispered, setting down the tea with shaking hands. "We'll figure it out," Autumn said. "But Rebecca? You need to see what else your name is on. Tomorrow." I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw bills with my name printed across the top, red stamps screaming overdue, collection agencies calling at dinner time. 3 days later, I went back to the apartment during her Thursday afternoon shift at the corner store, the only job she'd managed to keep for more than a month. My hand shook as I unlocked the door, half expecting her to be there anyway, ready for another fight. The place was empty. I moved quickly through my old room, grabbing the few things I'd left behind, my winter coat, my good shoes, some textbooks I'd need for finals. That's when I saw it sitting on the kitchen table, a thick manila envelope with my name printed across the front in bold red letters. Final notice. My heart dropped into my stomach. I opened it with trembling fingers. It wasn't just a utility bill. It was a credit card statement from Capital One. An account I had never opened. Never applied for. Never even knew existed. Balance due, $4,847.23. There were charges for a new television, a laptop, clothes from Macy's, dinner at the Cheesecake Factory, grocery bills from Giant Eagle that were triple what one person should spend. My vision blurred. I set that envelope down and looked at the others scattered across the table. Another credit card. Discover this time. $3,200. A medical bill from the Cleveland Clinic sent to collections. $1,850. A loan from a payday lending place I'd never heard of. $950, with interest that made my stomach turn. I sank onto the floor right there in the kitchen, surrounded by papers that proved this wasn't just dependency or poor money management or bad luck. This was betrayal. This was theft. She hadn't just leaned on me for support. She had used me, stolen my identity, destroyed my credit. And she'd done it all while looking me in the eye and calling me selfish. That evening, I sat at Autumn's coffee table with every piece of paper I'd found spread out in front of me like evidence at a crime scene. Autumn sat across from me, her laptop open, helping me organize everything into folders. "This is identity theft," she said quietly, not looking up from the screen. "You know that, right?" I wanted to argue with her. I wanted to say she was wrong, that it was more complicated than that you couldn't call it theft when it was your own mother. But the words wouldn't come because deep down, I knew she was right. "She's my mom," I finally whispered. "I know," Autumn said gently. "But that doesn't make this okay. And it doesn't mean you have to let her ruin your future." The next week became a crash course in protecting myself. I pulled my credit report from all 3 bureaus and discovered even more accounts I didn't recognize. I documented every single one with screenshots and photos. I went through my phone and saved every text message where she demanded money, every voicemail where she'd screamed at me for not sending more, every guilt trip about how hard her life was. It felt wrong, building a case against my own mother. It felt like betrayal. But then I'd look at those credit card statements, at the life she'd stolen from me before I'd even had a chance to live it, and I'd keep going. On Wednesday, Autumn drove me to a legal aid clinic in downtown Cleveland. The building was old and smelled like coffee and photocopier toner, and the waiting room was packed with people who looked as tired and lost as I felt. When my name was called, I met with a lawyer named Patricia Brennan. She was maybe 50, with grey-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She didn't flinch when I explained that the identity theft was committed by my mother. "Being family doesn't make it legal," she said firmly, looking directly into my eyes. "You have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to file a police report. And you absolutely have the right to dispute these charges." That was the moment everything shifted. I stopped feeling like a bad daughter and started feeling like a person with rights. A person who mattered. A person whose future was worth fighting for. Ms. Brennan helped me write out everything that needed to happen. File disputes with the credit bureaus. Report the identity theft to the Federal Trade Commission. Consider filing a police report, though she warned me that would likely mean my mother facing criminal charges. "I'll think about it," I said, even though the thought made me feel sick. The next step was the hardest. I opened a new bank account at a different bank, KeyBank instead of the Huntington branch where my mother knew all the tellers. I changed my direct deposit from Denny's. I went to the cell phone store and removed her line from my account, even when the representative looked at me like I was heartless. "Family plans save you money," he said with a disapproving frown. "Not this family," I replied. Then came the utilities. I called the electric company, the gas company, the internet provider. For each one, I explained that I no longer lived at the Maple Street address and needed my name removed from the accounts immediately. The representative from the electric company was the most direct. There's an outstanding balance of $340. If that's not paid by next Friday, service will be disconnected." I took a slow breath, thinking of all the money I'd poured into that apartment, all the bills I'd paid while she spent freely. "I understand," I said calmly. "Please proceed with removing my name." "But the power will be shut off," she repeated. "I understand," I said again. A month and 2 days after I'd walked out, my phone rang at 2:47 in the afternoon. I was at work, in the middle of refilling ketchup bottles in the Denny's back room, when I saw her name flash across the screen. My first instinct was to ignore it. I'd been ignoring her calls for weeks. But something made me answer this time. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the small part of me that still hoped she'd apologize. I wiped my hands on my apron and pressed accept. "Rebecca." Her voice exploded through the speaker before I could even say hello. "Why is the power off? What the hell did you do?" No greeting. No "how are you?" Just immediate accusation, like I'd committed some unforgivable crime. I stepped into the walk-in cooler where it was quieter and took a slow, steady breath, watching it fog in the cold air. "Did you pay the bill?" I asked calmly. "Don't you dare play dumb with me," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut. "They said you removed yourself from the account. Why would you do that to me? How could you leave me in the dark like this?" I thought about those credit card statements. The debt in my name that I'd never agreed to. The years of working myself to exhaustion while she spent every penny I earned. The way she'd looked at me that last night and told me to pay my own expenses like I was a burden instead of the only thing keeping her afloat. "I didn't do anything to you," I said quietly. "I just stopped paying for you." Silence. 4-5 long seconds. There was complete silence on the other end. What does that even mean?" she demanded, but her voice had lost some of its edge. Now she just sounded confused. "Lost. It means the account is in your name now," I explained, keeping my voice level and calm even though my heart was racing. "If the bill doesn't get paid, they shut off the power. That's how it works for everyone." That's when she exploded. She called me ungrateful, cruel, heartless, selfish. She said I was just like my father, abandoning her when she needed me most. She said I was ruining her life, that I'd never understand what it was like to struggle, that I'd always had it easy because of her sacrifices. The accusations poured out of her like poison, and I stood there in that walk-in cooler, listening to every word. And for the first time in my entire life, I didn't apologize. "You told me to pay my own expenses," I said when she finally paused for breath. "I listened. That's all I did. I listened to you. You can't just—" "Yes, I can," I interrupted, my voice still calm but firm. "I can pay my own expenses. I can have my own bank account. I can remove my name from bills for an apartment I don't live in anymore. I can do all of those things, and there's nothing wrong with any of them." She sputtered, trying to find a response, trying to make me feel guilty the way she always had. But I was done feeling guilty for taking care of myself. "The power company's number is on the bill," I said. "You can call them and set up a payment plan. Goodbye, Mom." I hung up before she could say anything else. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down on a crate of lettuce, but I also felt something I hadn't felt in years: free. She didn't take my new boundaries well. Within 2 days, my phone started blowing up, not from her, but from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. My Aunt Candace. My Uncle Lawrence. My cousin Natalie. Even my grandmother called from her retirement community in Florida. The story they'd all heard was the same: I'd stolen from my mother. I'd abandoned her in her time of need. I'd left her helpless and without power, internet, or phone service. I was cruel, ungrateful, a disappointment to the family. My mother had always been good at spinning stories, at playing the victim, at making herself look small and helpless while everyone else looked like monsters. For the first few calls, I tried to defend myself, tried to explain what had really happened. But they didn't want to hear it. They wanted me to be the villain, because it was easier than believing my mother was capable of what she'd done. By the 5th call, I stopped answering. But Aunt Candace, my mother's older sister, wouldn't take silence for an answer. She showed up at Denny's on a Thursday evening during dinner rush, marching up to my section like she owned the place. "We need to talk," she announced, loud enough that my tables turned to stare. "I'm working," I said, balancing 3 plates on my arms. "This is more important than work, Rebecca." I delivered the plates, asked my manager for a 5-minute break, and led my aunt outside to the parking lot where the October wind was biting cold. "How could you do this to your mother?" she started immediately, her arms crossed just like my mother's always were. "She raised you. She sacrificed everything for you. And this is how you repay her." "Did she tell you about the credit cards?" I asked quietly. Aunt Candace blinked. "What credit cards?" "The ones she opened in my name," I continued, my voice steady despite the anxiety crawling up my spine. "Without my knowledge. Without my permission. 5 different accounts. Over $10,000 in debt that I'm legally responsible for." "That's," Aunt Candace started, but I kept going. "Did she tell you about the medical bills? The payday loans? Did she tell you I've been paying every single expense for that apartment since I was 16 years old while she spent money on things we didn't need? Did she mention any of that?" My aunt's face had gone pale. "She said you were being dramatic. That you were exaggerating." "I have proof," I said simply. "Bank statements. Credit reports. Text messages. Everything. I want to see it." So that Sunday, I did something I'd been dreading. I agreed to a family meeting at Aunt Candace's house in Palmer. My mother would be there. My aunt and uncle. My grandmother on video call from Florida. My cousin Natalie. I showed up with Autumn for moral support and a folder full of documents I'd had printed and organized. My mother was already sitting on the couch when I arrived, her eyes red like she'd been crying. She looked up at me with such pain and betrayal that I almost turned around and left. But I didn't. "You brought witnesses," my mother said bitterly, looking at Autumn. "I brought evidence," I corrected, setting the folder on the coffee table. For the next hour, I walked them through everything. The credit card statements with charges I'd never made. The bank records showing years of my paychecks being drained. The overdue bills in my name for services at an address I no longer lived at. The text messages where she demanded money, threatened me, guilted me. The room got quieter and quieter as I went through each piece of paper. My mother tried to interrupt several times. "You don't understand. I needed that money. You're taking everything out of context." But Uncle Lawrence held up his hand to stop her. "Let her finish." When I was done, I looked at my grandmother's face on the iPad screen. She looked devastated. "Is this true, Diane?" Grandma asked my mother softly. My mother's face crumpled. I didn't have a choice. She was making money and I wasn't. "We are family. What's hers is mine." "That's called theft," Natalie said bluntly. "That's literally identity theft, Aunt Diane." She's my daughter. And that makes it worse, not better, Aunt Candace said quietly, and I could see the realization dawning on her face, the understanding that everything she believed was a lie. My mother looked around the room, searching for someone who would take her side, but everyone was looking at her like they were seeing her clearly for the first time. The landlord confirmed I'm legally removed from the lease, I said into the silence. And that there's an eviction notice coming if the back rent isn't paid within 30 days. My mother's head snapped toward me. You did this. You called them. You made this happen. No, I said firmly, meeting her eyes. I stopped letting you do it to me. There's a difference. The eviction notice came on a grey Tuesday in November. I heard about it from Aunt Candace, who called me while I was studying for my chemistry final in the campus library. They're moving forward with it, she said quietly. Your mother has 2 weeks to vacate. Is she going to fight it? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. How can she? She hasn't paid rent in 3 months, Rebecca. She has no case. I felt a complicated knot of emotions in my chest, guilt and relief and grief all tangled together so tightly I couldn't separate them. Where will she go? Lawrence and I talked about it, Aunt Candace said. She can stay in our guest room for a while. But there are conditions. She has to get a full-time job. She has to see a therapist. And she has to take financial responsibility for her own life. No more depending on other people. Will she agree to that? She doesn't have much choice. That evening, my mother called me from a number I didn't recognize, probably a neighbor's phone since her cell service had been disconnected. They're taking everything, she said, and her voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Not angry. Not demanding. Just hollow. Defeated. The apartment. My furniture. Everything. Are you happy now? I was sitting in Autumn's living room, wrapped in a blanket, trying to decide if I should even be having this conversation. This was never about winning, I said quietly, honestly. It was about surviving. There was a long pause. I could hear traffic in the background on her end, the distant sound of someone's TV through thin walls. Do you still love me? She asked, her voice small and broken. The question cracked something open in my chest that I'd been trying to keep sealed shut. Because the answer was complicated. The answer was yes and no, and it's not that simple all at once. I do, I finally said, and I meant it. That's why I had to stop. Because watching you destroy both of our lives wasn't love. It was just destruction. I never meant to hurt you. But you did, I said, and let the truth sit there between us. You hurt me over and over, and you kept doing it because I let you. Because I thought that's what daughters were supposed to do. But I can't anymore, Mom. I can't set myself on fire to keep you warm. She was crying now. I could hear it in her breathing. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to be on my own. Then figure it out, I said, not cruelly, but firmly. Go to therapy. Get a job. Learn to take care of yourself. But you have to want to do it. I can't want it for you anymore. And what about us? I closed my eyes. Maybe someday we can have a relationship again. A real one, built on honesty and respect instead of guilt and money. But not now. Not until you're ready to see me as a person instead of a paycheck. The line was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. I'm sorry, she finally said, and for the first time in years, it sounded genuine. I know, I replied. I'm sorry too. After we hung up, I sat in that silence for a long time. Autumn came out of her room and sat next to me on the couch, not saying anything, just being there. You okay? She finally asked. I think so, I said. And surprisingly, I meant it. 6 months later, I'm still living with Autumn, though I've started saving for my own place. I picked up extra shifts at Denny's and got a part-time job at the campus bookstore. My credit is slowly recovering, the fraudulent accounts have been removed, and I'm building a real financial foundation for myself. I transferred to Cleveland State University for the fall semester. Full-time. Majoring in social work because I want to help people who feel as trapped as I once did. My mother is living with Aunt Candace and Uncle Lawrence. She got a job at Target. Nothing glamorous, but it's steady and it's hers. Aunt Candace says she's actually going to therapy, though she hasn't said much about what they discuss. We don't talk often. Maybe once a month, brief phone calls that are awkward and careful, both of us learning how to be in each other's lives without the toxic patterns that defined us for so long. I don't know if we'll ever be close again. I don't know if I even want that. But I do know this. When she told me to pay my own expenses that night, she meant it as punishment. As proof that I couldn't survive without her. Instead, it became the greatest gift she ever gave me. Because I learned that I could stand on my own. That I was stronger than I ever believed. That choosing myself wasn't selfish, it was survival. She once shouted at me to pay my own expenses. In the end, I did. And for the first time in her life, she was forced to pay hers. Sometimes freedom doesn't look like winning. Sometimes it just looks like finally letting go. And that's enough.